Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Yay, thank you. Good morning, Calgary. Yes. So let me just start off by saying thank you. Thank you all for coming, and thank you really to Calgary Arts Development and to the mayor and to the city and to the sponsors that made this possible. I got in yesterday, right? And I have to tell people, I have been so impressed with what's going on here in Calgary. Right? So impressed. Everything from the mayor's leadership, obviously, to the partnership with the hoteliers, to the work that's going on in the community. I actually, despite all that Patty said and the kind words, which I'm a little bit embarrassed by, I honestly don't know what I can contribute to this conversation. I know I don't have the answers, that's for sure, right? What I have done is, however, I spent a whole bunch of time at this intersection of how arts and culture and community development kind of intersect. And what I hope to do is really be a part of that conversation today. But I do need to just say, so yesterday I had a chance, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that this my impression of Calgary really was other than being here as like a 10-year-old at the Stampede, was yesterday coming in and having a chance to go out to Forest Lawn and to have lunch out on International Avenue, right? And to be at the Art Box out there. To have a chance to drive through the East Village, right? And see the transformation that's occurring with really arts at the center and arts at the lead of that. To have a chance to go down to the King Edward School and to see what C-Space is doing down there, or to be over at the Container Art Park over in Sunnyside, right? It's amazing how much is going on. I don't know if you all realize this, right? But what I'll say is, from an outsider, from a visitor coming to Calgary, it's kind of amazing what you all are doing. And I just want to say congratulations, right? Yes, yeah, we absolutely should clap. Yes, yay! Thank you. Seriously. So I do a lot of work in community development. One of the things we actually fail to do is to celebrate our successes, right? And I'm going to suggest to you that we need to celebrate success, because if we don't, other people won't, right? And I'll just say that you all have it going on. So as I said, and as Patty mentioned, so my name is Erik Takeshita. I work for local initiatives. And I was trained as an artist. I'm a ceramic artist by training, and went to my undergraduate work as an artist. I spent about 20 years or so doing community regeneration work in Minneapolis and elsewhere in the country. And I have a firsthand knowledge of how arts and culture can transform people's lives and communities, right? And that's really where this passion comes from, is my own story growing up in Minneapolis and St. Paul and seeing firsthand kind of the power of arts to really transform people and places. So what I hope to do today is just start to share a little bit about my experience from Minneapolis and St. Paul, a little bit about the partners that we work with, some of the work that we've done here in Minneapolis, really as a way of helping to participate in this conversation that you all are having the rest of this day about how we can really leverage the power of arts and culture to build a great Calgary, right? That's really what we're here to do, right? Is this whole idea of looking at how do we put art at the center of building a great city. So what I hope to do is I want to start with arts and culture, talk a little bit about art and culture, and then talk a little bit about community development, right? There's two parts of this equation for me. So, fairly simple. So with art, and I'm kind of a constructivist, you'll learn through my presentation. So just starting with, what does this word actually mean, art? So I, of course, pulled my dictionary off the shelf when I was looking at this question, and Webster's dictionary says that art is a conscious use of skill and creative imagination. Right? This is one of many definitions, but this is one I chose to use. Is this idea of this conscious use of skill and imagination. And what I'll suggest to you is that we have conflated in our lexicon, in our language, we've conflated art and culture. And what I would like to suggest is those are two different things. And in fact, I have a friend that runs the Ashe Cultural Center in New Orleans, Carol B. Bell, and she talks about how in New Orleans, art may be the favorite daughter, but culture is the big mama, right? So this whole idea that art clearly represents and reflects the culture, but the culture is actually the way that we interact with each other. It's our set of values, it's our norms, it's our familial relationships, it's the food we eat, the language we speak, right? So as we move through the day, at least, and as you interact with me today, what I'd like to just share with you is my definition is culture is the big mama and art is the favorite daughter. It's also important, though, for us to recognize that art is made by artists, right? So again, I pull off my trusty dictionary, and it says that artists are one who profess and practice an imaginative art, right? So profess and practice, right? Again, one of many definitions. But when you start to put those two definitions together, we end up with a definition of an artist that looks like this, right? One who professes and practices conscious use of skill and creative imagination, right? So this idea of kind of broadening the definition of the arts right? And thinking culture and broadening the definition of artists, right? So now, I need to take a step back, right? Because I have a bunch of friends who are practicing professional artists who do the most amazing work in their medium. And they say, wait, hold on a second, Eric, hold on a second. What are you doing? You know, I went to art school, I have an MFA, I've spent thousands and thousands of hours honing my skills. And, you know, what are you doing trying to broaden this definition of artists? And what I would say to you is that the scarcity definition of artists, this kind of capital A artist, this fear-based idea that we have to hold it precious, actually does the arts a disservice, right? This whole idea of needing to build more champions is, I think, absolutely what we need to be doing. We need to be broadening that circle, right? So let me just ask a quick question. Who here skis? Does anybody ski? Okay. How about, does anybody like have kids, or did anybody play hockey as a kid, right? All right. So, okay, for those of you that ski or play hockey, how many of you accidentally showed up at the Olympics to go skiing or show up at the Saddle Dome to play hockey? Right? It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. But yet, I can consider myself a skier, a cross-country skier, a downhill skier, and not accidentally show up at the Olympics, right? It doesn't happen. I can also, I can play hockey with my kid in the backyard, and I don't show up to play at the NHL. In fact, what happens is it builds a broader base of support, right? Because I ski, and because I know how hard it is, and because I'm so tired at the end of the day, right? I have that much more appreciation for professional skiers, for professional hockey players. I know the talent and the work and the perseverance that's needed to achieve at that high of a level, right? And let me suggest to you that the same is true in the arts, right? The more that we broaden the definition of the arts, the more that we allow other people to be artists, right? Claim their space as artists, that they actually can grow their appreciation for true artistic excellence when they see it, right? That both are true, and in fact, one is required of the other. So that's, for me at least, that's a little bit for me about art and artists, right, and culture. Because what I want to kind of move into is how do we then think about what is our role as artists and as arts organizations in helping to build a stronger community? What's our investment as artists and arts organizations to help build a great Calgary, right? So let me move into the community development side of the house a little bit. So for me, community development really, I'm going to talk about 3 legs of the community development stool. So the first is kind of the people side, right, the kind of individuals and a sense of agency and voice and a sense of how we connect with one another. The second is kind of the physical transformation of place. And the third is kind of the economic benefits that the arts can lead to. So as LISC, we think about this kind of 3-legged stool of human social capital, physical capital, and economic capital. So the first is a sense of agency and connectedness. And really there's 2 parts to this one, right? One part is the individual, and the other part is kind of the shared experiences. So as an individual, I mentioned that I was trained as a ceramic artist, right? And as a ceramic artist, one of the things that's interesting is that when I throw a pot and I poke my finger into that clay, right, on the wheel, it makes a mark. And I put that in the kiln and I fire it, and that thing comes out as a vessel that has my mark in it, right? I've literally made my mark in the world, right? And I can go to a museum and I can see a vessel that was made 2,000 years ago by some Greek or Chinese person or what have you, that has similarly made their mark in the world. There's a permanence to it. Now, I haven't done this research, but I want to. I actually believe that there's something that does in one's brain that gives them a sense of agency, a sense that I can make a difference in the world. And I think that's what the arts, participation in the arts, can do. Right? So the question then for me, to you all, as artists and arts organizations, is how is it that we can help people grow their sense of agency? Because whether it's through ceramics or whether it's through drawing, whether it's through dance or through poetry, it's by putting people's voice and their mark in the world that actually, I think, changes the brain and says, oh yeah, I can make a difference. That this community is my community, right? The sense of voice is critical. And so this is an image from an artist, Oscar Lee, who ran a project called Artify, in which she, and I'll get to this later about transformation spaces, but she actually asked people what home was for them and asked them to write it on a chalkboard, right? So this whole idea of artists facilitating this sense of voice, particularly when we start to deal with issues around inclusion and equity, right? Because many people don't feel that they have a voice in the future of our communities. Not everybody feels right now that they're a part of what's going on. And so part of it is, how do we as artists help people have a voice and have a sense of their role in that? Another artist, Kristen Murray, became the artist. She self-proclaimed herself as an artist in residence at a bus stop, right? So this idea of thinking about public spaces and thinking about them differently and how the arts can help us think about spaces differently. And she encouraged people then and said, oh, this bus stop is going to be part of our neighborhood cleanup, right? And really asking and inviting people to have a role in their community. So that's the first part of the human and social capital, right? This whole idea of how does the arts help people have a sense of voice and have a sense of agency. The second part of the human and social capital I want to talk about is really this idea of how people connect to each other, right? And for anybody that's studied social capital, right, with Robert Putnam, blah, 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 there's these forms of social capital. They talk about bonding capital, in which people connect with people that are like them, bridging capital, kind of connecting across differences, and linking capital, that talks about kind of people with different differentials in the power structure being able to connect across differences or across sectors, so linking capital. So bonding, bridging, and linking. And what I'd suggest is that the arts are uniquely positioned to help build all three forms of social capital. Right? The arts is a universal language. The arts is kind of something that we all share, is something that is uniquely capable of helping to build those forms of capital. So this slide, in the upper, what is it, your left, is actually a block party, right, where artists said, oh, rather than everybody sitting around and staring at each other over a grill, we're going to have arts activities at our block party, right? And how does it help people think differently about their neighbors and help connect with people? The one on the upper right is actually an event we did in St. Paul just this summer as part of a series of events in business districts where we hired artists to do events. And it's kind of an African drum circle in this place called Little Africa that brought together people from 15 different African countries, the kind of African diaspora, and the residents of the community to really celebrate the arts. And then finally below is a powwow that one of our partners, the Native American Community Development Institute, does every year. So, but the arts to me are uniquely positioned. They're uniquely powerful in terms of being able to bring together people to really help create a sense of stronger community, whether it's in a block or within a cultural community, right? But the other forms are this kind of idea of bridging capital, right? So how is it the arts and culture can help connect people to people that they don't know, right? So this project is one by Amanda Lovely, where they built what they call the really big table, right? That you haul behind on a bicycle and you bring it to public spaces, right? So this happens to be the really big table in a big plaza in downtown St. Paul that is usually just this giant cold concrete plaza. And what they brought it down in the summer, and they said, hey, we're going to host lunches here. We're going to invite people to have their lunch out at this really big table and meet people that they have never talked to otherwise, right? Rather than sitting on the steps, which is what people usually do, right? So this whole idea of how do we as artists and arts organizations create space, create containers, if you will, for us to have these interactions that are kind of fun and interesting and exciting with people that we don't know to start to build connections with one another. Another example of capital is this, which is a woman, an artist, Diane Lane. She created something called the Light Rail Shuffle. She's a Zumba instructor and choreographer. And we were building an extension to our light rail line in St. Paul. And so LISC, working in partnership with the city of St. Paul and a group there called Springboard for the Arts, not your Springboard, a different Springboard, but Springboard for the Arts, created this project called Irrigate Arts. If you want to know more, go to irrigatearts.org, where we trained about 600 artists that lived or worked in the neighborhood around placemaking, right? Around what would it mean for them to claim their place. And we said, you go through this one-day training, and if you partner with a business or a community organization, we'll give you $1,000 to do your project, right? That was pretty much the requirement. You had a workshop at yada yada, but really it was go to the training, you get the $1,000. So the 600 artists that we trained, about 180 of them did projects, and of that, 180 artists did projects, and there was about 120 projects, and Diane's was one of them. And this was, the train is going through just a couple blocks south of where the interstate had gone through, the freeway had gone through, and really displaced a bunch of folks in the community. And so Diane did this Zumba in which she did the light rail shuffle, talking really about the historical trauma that occurred in Rondo when they put the freeway through this African-American community, and said, hey, we don't want that to happen again, right? But what's interesting about the light rail shuffle is that she did this first as an Irrigate project. She's then now done it a number of times, including with the mayor, right? So our mayor got out there and did a light rail shuffle. And one of the things that my friend Laura at Springboard says is that you just can't do the light rail shuffle with the mayor and not think about him in a different way, right? It's just not possible. And so this whole idea of how can the art create these containers and environments again for us to have these different types of relationships with people, right, that may be across sectors or across kind of power differentials, right? Even, as we think about budget meetings or others, how would we bring in the arts into some of those conversations? And what would that do? How might that change the nature of those discussions? I would, of course, be remiss if I also didn't talk about just the value of the arts in creating a sense of joy and delight and play. Right? I was at dinner with some folks last night, and we talked about the value of play. And obviously, and I cannot overemphasize simply the role of the arts in making life fabulous, right? And so artists doing work in the public sphere with public folk, with everyday folks, right? Just by the virtue of practicing that work, it makes people's lives better because it's fun, right? So let's not underestimate that. So anyways, that's how I see, at least, some ways in which arts really affect kind of that human and social capital development part of the community. Physical transformation is the second leg of the stool. So with physical transformation, and I should say at this point that these are three things that I name as separate merely for organizational purposes. They're all obviously connected and intrinsically related to one another, right? So a great example of that is this project. It's as I mentioned, NACD, the Native American Community Development Institute. They opened this kind of gallery and coffee shop on a street which they call the American Indian Cultural Corridor, right? And in the gallery, they exhibit Native artists, right? And this has really become a focal point for the Native community to, again, have that sense of voice. Like, how do they tell their story in the way that they want to tell their story, right? And in a way that really helps create a gathering place for people to come together and to hear and be in community with one another. So the physical space, then, the physical transformation of both the gallery, creation of the gallery, and the cultural corridor becomes a place, right, a physical container, if you will, for people to then kind of connect. So that's one way that physical transformation of this place is important. Another example, though, is this. This is Juxtaposition Arts, which is a LISC partner. And they're a community development and economic development organization that trains youth in arts. And when they opened this facility in 2007, right next door to them was a vacant building. Across the street was a vacant building. Behind them was a vacant building. Right, you can maybe get a picture of this neighborhood, right, where basically it's one of the busiest intersections in North Minneapolis, and yet it had vacant buildings on 3 of the 4 corners, right? And Juxta goes in there in 2007, and what I'll say to you today, in 2014, in that 7-year period, there's been $60 million worth of real estate on those 2 blocks, right? Now, clearly Juxta did some of that, but what I would suggest is more powerful is that Juxta put a stake in the ground, right? They said, this is our community, and this is a community worth caring about, and this is a community that you should invest in, right? And that's what's happened. We've seen investment as a result of artists going into a place and saying, yeah, this is a good place to be, right? So it's not that they did it themselves, but it is critical, and I think that there's a role of arts and arts organizations in helping to foster that sense of possibility, right? I also have a little sidebar story is that the building just off this picture to the left, they also have the building on the corner, which is a 2-story building where their offices were. And they put this bubble machine out their 2nd floor window, and they blow bubbles over the intersection, which is where like one of the most used bus stops is, and they're having all kinds of issues around like people getting in fights and whatever. And they said, you blow bubbles over a bus stop, and people just can't be angry. You just can't get in a fight. So again, like thinking about creative interventions to solving everyday problems, right? And that's what artists do. That's what we're good at as artists, right? And Juxta is a great example of that. Another piece where artists play a role in physical transformation is this is a Victoria Theater, which is in St. Paul. And as part of Irrigate, some artists did this fashion show, dance and fashion show in front of the theater building, which is a vacant building for about the last 20 years. But what it did was it actually forced people to imagine, oh, if this could be revitalized as an art center, this is what could happen actually inside the building, not outside the building on the street, right? And after this was actually done, this group of artists actually now has formed a group, and the Land Bank, which is a Twin Cities-based organization, has actually acquired this property, and they're working towards revitalizing this particular property, right? So this whole idea of artists, again, seeing what doesn't yet exist and being able to kind of inspire and call to action people to make a difference in their community. So this is a great example of that with the Victoria Theater. I had mentioned Oscar's project earlier, Oscar Lee, who was an artist organizer that was actually embedded in a community-based organization that LISC works with. And as anybody that does in the development side of things, the development process is where you buy a piece of property, and then there's a whole period of time in which you're trying to assemble all your financing, and you have to get your architectural plans and all your permits, and yada, yada, yada. And the neighborhood stuck with this big vacant land for years on end, right? And so Oscar, as an artist organizer, actually said, okay, well, we're going to take this vacant car lot, right, which was basically a neighborhood eyesore, and we're going to put art on it. And we're going to welcome the residents that are in the immediate neighborhood to start to have a conversation about what home is, right? As a way of then welcoming in advance these new neighbors, because they're going to build 108 units on this old car lot, right, of social housing. And there was a little bit of like consternation, right, on the part of the existing neighbors. Well, so what we actually did was Oscar programmed a whole series of events to basically invite the neighborhood in to say, hey, let's have a conversation about what home is, and let's be sure that we're kind of laying the groundwork to welcome these new neighbors into our community. So this is a great example to me of how we can think about arts helping to animate and activate vacant spaces, particularly in the development process as we think about physical transformation of neighborhoods. There's obviously, these next few slides are really things I think are often what people think about when we think about physical transformation. And I added them because they're obviously important, but I would also suggest that they're not sufficient, right? These are important, but they're necessary and important, but not necessarily where we should end. So things like creating, this is outside of juxtaposition where they've claimed part of the street for a park. The bottom slide is actually where juxtaposition, they've created these bike carts that they drive around town. To do these kind of tactical urbanism interventions, fancy language, but where they bike around and they have games like a chessboard and other kind of twister and what have you, and they have music that they play out of these bikes, and they really just, again, as a way of creating a sense of community and connection between people. Carrie Christensen is an artist, an irrigate artist, that decorated these bikes that had been kind of thrown away for actually wayfinding within the neighborhood, as a way of helping people navigate how to get to different places along the corridor and how to get to different businesses. In St. Paul, we have a Paint the Pavement program where block clubs can actually get together and work with artists to design pavement painting within intersections. And then these planters were designed by Juxta out in front of their building, along with a lot of these other things like yarn bombing, taking over garbage cans, utility boxes, what have you, and really thinking differently about the public realm and how artists can start to call attention to kind of what we see every day. Murals are obviously a key part. This is a mural that's in a little Mekong, which is an Asian American business district in St. Paul, which is a beautiful piece. I'm just going to close with this, which is a stained glass piece by an artist named Steve Bougie, he installed these little pieces of stained glass into this chain link construction fence along the light rail. And there was an article written about it in the paper in which the author of the article said, it's kind of like the broken windows theory in reverse, right? So instead of seeing a broken window and saying nobody cares about this community, this little piece of stained glass in the neighborhood was actually signposting that people do care about the community. A little piece of joy and delight in the middle of this construction zone, really signaled to people that, hey, this is a place to care about, and this is a place that we should be investing in. So that's just a few of the ways that I think that artists can play a critical role in helping to transform the physical landscape. So whether it's bringing joy and delight, whether it's transforming entire buildings, whether it's spurring on tens of millions of dollars of investment, these are all different ways that we can think about artists kind of contributing to the physical transformation of place. I think my third piece that is really about the economic benefits. So kind of human social capital, physical, and then economics. And we often start with economics. We often talk a lot about the economic benefit of the arts and attracting tourists and which is all fabulous. It's absolutely necessary and needed. I'd also suggest that economic benefit can extend further beyond that, right? It's kind of like going beyond the mural. So this is a irrigate project in which I mentioned this light rail construction. When we did the light rail construction, the street was entirely torn up, right? So behind the construction scaffolding, there's actually a coffee shop that's called the Black Dog Cafe, which you wouldn't know by this picture. And so what they did, an artist actually said, oh, well, I can't see your sign, so I'm going to bring your sign out to people. And so he created this two-person puppet that then would walk around the neighborhood and welcome people to the Black Dog, right? So this whole idea of like, hey, I've got a problem. How can the arts help me think differently about that problem and help them solve that problem, right? This whole idea of bringing the creative practice, this idea of professing and practicing it. Another example of this is, and again, anybody in development knows this, where you build a building and this is a commercial space that's now a restaurant, but commercial building out a commercial kitchen takes a number of months, right? And so oftentimes we see these signs in the windows all papered over with newspaper, brown butcher paper, and it says, coming soon. And then the sign starts to yellow, and then it falls down, and it just like gives a sense of despair, right? And so what we did in this case was we actually hired artists to do paper murals in the windows, where they would actually did a series of paper murals about every 6 weeks or so, in which they would change them out, and they'd always be kind of fresh and always kind of signposting and signaling what's going to be behind the curtain, right? And this whole idea of starting to build momentum and enthusiasm for the business that was there. So that's just a couple ways in which we think about how arts can help businesses. There's obviously the pop-ups, right? I work in neighborhoods where there's lots of vacant space, where there's lots of kind of vacant storefronts, vacant land, what have you. And so this whole idea of how do arts think, how do we use those spaces and activate and animate those spaces for arts-related activities is an important piece of it. Because, quite frankly, artists are businesses, right? And we need to remember that. We need to remember that artists, as entrepreneurs, are businesses, and we need to treat them as such, and we need to expect artists to think that way. Right? That they are a business and that they can actually be an economic engine in and of themselves. So just as the mayor talked about, the trailer manufacturer is part of the movie industry, right? Artists have all kinds of economic ripples as producers of work and as members of the economy. So an example that is Diane Elaine, who I mentioned earlier, who did the light rail shuffle. Where she did it first, on the left here, is where she did it, her first iteration of it was as an irrigate project in a parking lot of a bar, right? But then after that, she was hired on the bottom right, she was hired then by Springboard and LISC to do it again at a community celebration we had, which then actually led to her doing it at the opening of our train station when we opened up the light rail line, right? So this whole idea of how do we help create mechanisms for artists to start to grow their businesses and help to be kind of contributors to the economy. Now, importantly, this isn't about artists necessarily dumbing down their work, right? We actually had this conversation just yesterday with some folks about how it's also about how artists can think about doing their work in different contexts, right? So this is a series of images from a restaurant in St. Paul called My Village, which you literally could not get to their restaurant during this light rail construction. And so a number of artists said, hey, we really care about My Village. We're going to lend our talents and skills to My Village, and we're going to start presenting music in their venue. And the owner was like, no way, you guys are crazy, I don't want to do that. And finally, business got so bad, she said, sure, I'll try it out, right? And what she found was that when these musicians would come in and perform in her restaurant, her receipts went up by about 50% from nights when they weren't there, right? So we have a clear economic benefit to the restaurateur, right? And the artists are not changing their repertoire at all, right? They're still presenting the same work. They're still presenting, in this case it was jazz music, they're still doing the same sets and they're still doing the same music at the same level of quality. It's just merely in a different venue. And Mira, the jazz artist that actually has done a lot of work with what she'll say is that by doing the work in a different place has actually made me a better artist. It's made me think about my work in different ways. So this whole idea of creating reciprocal relationships in which artists are meaningful contributors to their community, as well as helping their art actually becoming better and improved. This is an image that's actually next door to My Village. This is the Asian Economic Development Association has created a series of night markets in which artists are animating and activating this parking lot that's next door to My Village, and bringing in artists to do these fun festivals and events as a way of really drawing attention to the neighborhood and bringing customers and visitors into the place. And I think that part of this, and what we found with Irrigate, one of the important things is that art and arts-related activities, and quite frankly, just stuff that's fun and interesting, can change how people think about neighborhoods, right? So many neighborhoods I work in, they have this story that those are dangerous places, those aren't places you want to go to, those are places that are scary. And what I would suggest to you is that the arts can shift the narrative of a community. They can shift the story of a place. And in fact, with Irrigate, we track that. So Irrigate was a 3-year project, and this is only halfway through, so we need to refresh this. But halfway through, we tracked the number of media impressions. How many times did Irrigate artists' stories show up in the newspaper, on radio, and television, et cetera? And we found that we had 30 million media impressions as a result of those 120 projects I talked about earlier, $1,000 projects. Now, that's a little bit fuzzy. It's hard to kind of quantify what that means, unless you're into impressions. But what I'll say is that we also, complementary to this, we had a marketing firm that we paid about 3 times more than what we paid to artists, and they got the same results, right? So what I'm going to suggest is that as we think about marketing, whether it's cities or businesses or communities, that the arts can play a key role in helping us think about attracting attention and changing the story of places. And just as I shared with the bubbles and as I shared with Sense of Joy and Delight, let's not also forget that arts just make things fun. So this is actually a flamenco troupe that walked along the corridor, and then they would come in and do pop-up like flamenco dances in little bodegas and at the fire station and at restaurants, right? So this whole idea of arts just bringing joy and wonderment and delight into everyday life is a critical piece of that economic benefit. So with that, I'll close with this idea. This is actually from Oscar's project, where really because art is the meaning of life, right? It really is. And so for me, as I think about this question about how do we create a great Calgary, what role do the arts and arts organizations have in helping to do that, I would suggest that you absolutely do. That if we expand our definition of artists, if we broaden and think about arts in a big kind of the big tent, if you will, of really thinking about arts and its role in building a stronger culture, of being inclusive. If we think about community development in terms of how the arts can lead to this idea of a sense of agency for individuals and voice, a sense of connection between people, how it can lead to transformation of physical place and result in economic benefit for folks, that's how the arts and culture are integrated and integral to what we're seeking to do here. So I, for one, am very much looking forward to the conversation the rest of this day, and I'm really excited about all the work you have done and the work that you will be doing here in Calgary. So thank you so much.